Okay, how was lunch? Great. Okay. Do you have an idea of how big this stage feels? Okay. So let's get started. Um, Most of us are used to designing in contexts like this for people who maybe look like this, who are trying to sell goods and services for people like this. But what happens when we have to design in a context like this for people like this, who may be trying to help people in a situation like this or this one? So my presentation will be around how design looks, how design feels in these situations, and how can we help designers, help disaster responders to do their job better. How can we leverage them? So I would like to start with a real story. This guy is called Hamish. He works for an organization called Map Action, whose mission is to provide valuable geographical information to UN staff during an emergency. For example, like the one that happened in Haiti in January 2010. So before going on with Hamish, a little more context about how a disaster looks. When a disaster like Haiti's earthquake happens, certain rescue teams from all over the world deploy to the place. And they offer their help to get people out of rubble. So they are coordinated in tents like this by UN staff. The problem they have to solve is that they need precise coordinates to know where to go so that they can get people out, rescue people. And it's not a minor problem because most of these teams come from all over the world and may not know specifically the place where the disaster happened. So if they get the precise coordinates, they can go straight to the point, and their chances of getting people out increase. So that was basically what Hamish tried to do when he was there. He would receive reports from people being trapped somewhere, but those reports were quite ambiguous. So they would say something like, hey, I think my uncle was at, I don't know, St. Austin's hospital when the earthquake struck. So he would have to start going from tent to tent in the disaster response camp, trying to find someone who may have these coordinates, who may know someone who knows where the St. Austin hospital was. So eventually, during one of those visits, he stumbled upon Instead's tent. Instead is where I work. And as the presenter told you, we work trying to find innovative solutions to disasters, to epidemics, and to health issues. So he met these two guys, Eric, who was Instead's CEO at that moment, and Nick, the guy at the left. So they were the only guys there who had a working internet connection at that moment, because they deployed just after the earthquake struck the city, the country. So they were the only guys who had a working connection and were willing to share it. When they met Hamish, they offered to do the following thing. Hamish would give them reports, and they would write them down in a Skype conference, in a public Skype conference, a chat room. So people from all over the world who wanted to help started helping Hamish, looking for these coordinates. So it was a kind of improvised crowdsourcing solution. From then on, Hamish would come to Instead tent periodically, and he would bring with him a bunch of papers with new reports, with new ambiguous reports, and hand them to Eric, who would, in charge, give him the reports that were geocoded from the since his previous visit. So he would be running from tent to tent anyway. So Nick and Eric wondered, hey, we can help this guy. What if we let him send reports through SMS to a number we provide him, and make those messages reach a website automatically, where these volunteers from all over the world may be able to help to geocode. It was kind of, okay, we have this workflow which works with Skype and Hamish running from tent to tent, and now let's try to leverage it and make it a bit more automatic, and well, in that way we can take some weight, we can take some work off Hamish's shoulders. So once the reports were geocoded, he would receive the same message, but this time tagged with the precise coordinates. So then he would go to the search and rescue teams with those precise coordinates without having to lose time running through all the camp. So he was so happy about this that he even wrote an email to his boss in Map Action. And I want to remark these words. He said that the NGO instead provided a sophisticated location search system. So what I've just explained you doesn't sound that sophisticated, I think. And it wasn't, in fact. We think it was adequate instead. It did succeed at taking some work off Hamish's shoulders, and what's more important, it came in time. So that's the fundamental concept of what I want to talk to you about from now on. It's time. It's the scarcest resource in this situation, and it's what we have to optimize for. So to gain a little more insight about how this kind of context is, I would like to just discuss some common techniques that usually are quite useful in user experience or research, and in this case may fail. So this is when you start hating me. For example, ethnographic interviews. They are really useful to understand users and their goals. But, sorry, there's no time. And it's not that we don't have time. It's that our users won't have time. They are trying to save lives out there. So it's a bit it's like pretending too much. If you want them to sit down with you and give you an interview, or maybe 2 or 3 hours, so that won't work. What actually will work is direct observation. You can gain a lot of insight about how these guys are working by observing them, and you shouldn't become an obstacle. Or take, for example, card sorting, which lets us organize information and concepts, understand how users organize information and concepts. The problem with this technique is that if you are trying to make something as complex as to need a card sorting exercise, maybe you are not in the right moment. You should stick to something really simple if you want to have any hope of delivering something useful in the time window you need to deliver it. So again, there's no time. And what about personas? They are wonderful to understand user behaviors, but they are a very good tool to make guesses. You design your persona, and then when you have some doubts on the next design decision you have to make, you go to the persona and say, hey, would you like if I did this or that? But here you have real personas, real people. So those are the ones you have to focus on. Another thing is that personas let you understand the different groups of users that are going to be using your application or your product. And in this case, you have at least, at most 1, 2, 3 people. So speaking of groups, maybe not adequate. So again, personas take a lot of research, and research means time, which is scarce. So now that you hate me, what may work? So these are some learnings we got from our experience. It's not academic research at all, and this is something that's working for us, and it's what we want to share. So the first thing is you have to be there, and at least one member of the team has to be in the very place where things are happening. There's no hope that you can make a kind of abduction through a Skype call. You have to be there because people there are badly slept. They are eating tin food for weeks. All of them are overworked. So the only way you can understand them is by being there. But it's not enough to be there. You also have to be ready. And by ready, I mean that it's not like the usual trip, that you buy an airplane ticket and then you book a hotel room and you just drop there. The place where you are going is under a humanitarian crisis. So you have to take your own stuff. You have to be self-sustainable for the whole time you are spending there. That means that you have to bring your own food, water, electricity generation means, and so on. And if you fail to do so, you have to be careful, because disaster responders even have a name for people who go there and prepare and just drop to the response camp. They call them disaster tourists, and they don't like them. So, supposing you're already there and you're ready, the next question for me is, how does the design process change from what's usual, from our everyday design project? So let's go over how the design process looks in our everyday work. So let's say after some research, we have some high-level goals for our product. We start observing reality. We start observing the environment. We try to understand how people lives in this given context. We try to see how they relate to each other and to the things around them. And after a while, we are confident enough to start designing, which is, well, to combine those research we have been doing with our own experiences as designers and our own skills, and try to get the best solution for the problem given the constraints. So after some time of trying to come up with the best ideas, we are ready to prototype. We start prototyping, and once we get the first prototype, we put it again to test and under test in the environment. And then we observe how it changes the reality, if it solves the problem the problems we were trying to solve, and where it brings new problems to the table. And we iterate over and over again this cycle. Eventually, we feel confident enough, or perhaps we are about to run out of budget, and we publish, we ship the first version of our product. And depending on the product and its success, we start iterating over and over again, exercising this cycle. So just as an example, that timeline shows you that perhaps in 1 month you can have your first release of the product. So how does it compare to the situation we are discussing now? Okay, it looks like this. The first thing to notice is that the prototype phase is gone, and your best effort has to be put in that your very first version has to be usable, which should be something doable because you are trying to do something really, really simple. Then you can go on iterating, but you already have a version out there. The reason for this is that the search and rescue phase of a disaster response takes at most 2 or 3 weeks. After that time, the search and rescue phase is called to an end, and no more survivors are searched for. And for every day that goes by, your chances of getting new survivors are decreased. So you have to do your best to ship something in 1 or 2 days. Another thing to notice is that in the previous example, those transitions take days in the best of cases, or maybe weeks, or maybe even months. Yesterday, Brian talked about pushing the testing to as soon as possible from the beginning of the project. So I think that's the spirit of this, but this is a bit more extreme in this case. So now I would like to so let's say you are already there, and what do you do? What's the next step? how do you do to help someone? Well, find that someone. Identify the guy who's needing some help from you. And once you identified him or her, it's your master. You know that for each stakeholder you take into account when you design when you are trying to design something, the complexity of the solution grows exponentially because of communication, because of the particular desires that each person has. So just try to attach to that person you have found, make it your master. But then, if you have been able to identify this guy or these 2 or 3 guys you want to help, remember you won't have a lot of time to talk to them, because, as I said before, they are under a lot of work. They are really overworked and badly slept. So you will have to be prepared to get as much feedback as possible in a very short amount of time. You have so few opportunities of talking to these people, and maybe it will be during a coffee break they take, because when they are not out there trying to get someone out of the rubble, they are attending some coordination meeting. So a good thing to do is to make a list of the most important questions you would like to ask, and have it in priority order, so that when you have the chance, you get the most out of it. Otherwise, your only input is direct observation, which is the most important in this case. So the context we are trying to design a solution for here is quite special. There are lots of things of everyday life that you won't get there. You won't find in a disaster response camp. So it's very important that you feel comfortable with what's out there. When I was making this presentation, I was thinking of displaying some cuts from Apollo 13. Do you remember that scene where they, all the engineers gather around the table, and one of them says, "Okay, we have to make this fit into this, only using this," and he throws all the contents of a box on the table. And those things were the things that the astronauts had inside the ship, and nothing else. So the most common interfaces you can count on, and that you can count on responders knowing how to use. Sorry for this phrase; it was terrible. It's low-end cell phones, radio, and GPS. Any responder, any disaster responder has a GPS device, and they know how to use it. They know geography, they know geographic information systems. So that's a very strong background you can count on. As regards radio, every responder has one. It's the most reliable communication mean, because it doesn't depend on connections or antennas, other than the antennas that you can find right in the devices. But they can become a bit obtrusive when the information you are trying to communicate is not high priority, because it starts making this really bothering noises. So for conveying low priority information, SMS is a very useful way of doing that. In general, responders will have low-end cell phones. The reason is that, in general, smartphones are more expensive and they break quite easily. And it's a kind of paradox that the most cheap devices, in this case, are the most robust ones. And if they break, it's not a problem because it's cheap to replace them. But also, it's a very powerful way of outreaching for population. 85% of Haitians' households have at least one cell phone. So it's really a very powerful way of reaching for people. For example, during the response in Haiti, we sent more than 1 million messages to the population. And those messages contain valuable information like, please don't go to this hospital because it's full, go to this other one. Or for example, like, don't drink water without using purifying pills. And then it's paper, the old paper. Paper is the most powerful way of sharing information with people who live in the same place as you are living. And I have a personal example of this. So do you know what's a loser? I'm 26 years old, and I live with my parents. And, well, last week they went on a trip. My mother would pin a lot of these little pieces of paper around the whole house with useful advice for me. Like, for example, leave all the artifacts and lights turned off before going out, and please behave. The same happens in the coordination tents out there in the disaster response camps. Here you can see a dashboard which conveys a lot of really important information for the everyday stuff they have to coordinate. So, for example, here you can see the timeline of all the important coordination meetings that have to be held every day, so that everyone is on the same page. There's a lot of people going around the whole camp, and they have to be quite synchronized. And this is the way they synchronize. And here you can see a list of the search and rescue teams available and their capabilities. Or here are some important coordinates of field hospitals. And even it's something that's updatable. Someone got the phone of a guy who's working in the Russian field hospital and just wrote it down. Then everyone else came to know what the phone was. So if you're trying to do something that conveys information, it's very important to make it printer friendly, because that's the basic element they use to communicate. Okay, a good example of interactions with paper and systems is walking papers. Any one of you knows walking papers? Okay. The idea is very simple. A disaster has changed the way your place looks. So you want to collaborate with the community and update update the maps. So you print a map of your zone, start walking around, and writing down all the relevant information facts you want to write down. Then you come back home, you scan it, or maybe take a picture of it, and upload it to the walking paper system, which hasn't to be in internet. It can be deployed in a private server. So, and then walking papers overlay the image you got with the map layers, so you can update the information. So it's a very clever way of letting people in a community to update their maps and keep their maps up to date, especially when something has changed drastically the way the place looks. No batteries? Okay. So when I talk about design in a situation, in an emergency situation or a disaster situation, I can't ignore the implementation part, because that's the goal. The goal is to have something working before it's too late. So I think it's very important to know how to organize the team so that you can get the most out of every single member. We think that the best way to achieve success in these cases is through what we call incremental design. And by this, I mean basically trying to divide your design problem in as small pieces as possible, so that you can work out each small piece one at a time. So when you have one piece already solved, you can give it to the engineers in your team and have them start implementing them while you are still designing. So, for example, in this case, in the case of a tool we built for Hamish, we knew from the very beginning that we wanted to interact with him through SMS. So the engineers started immediately to implement that part of the system. And then the rest of the team, the designers, would focus on the views for the crowd. So a fundamental characteristic that the team has to have as a skill is fluent communication, because each role in the team has to be validating constantly what the other guys are doing, what they are doing with the other guys. For example, designers have to ask engineers what is feasible in a matter of hours. If they come up with an idea that may not be possible to implement in a matter of hours, they have to throw it away. That's an additional constraint to the design. And engineers, as they are working with incomplete, non-comprehensive design, they have to make a lot of little design decisions. And from time to time, they need to validate them. So this is our take on how to approach the team collaboration in these cases. So the question that arises to me is, okay, how do we do it? Because it sounds simple. I think the ideas are quite simple, but when you go to the practice, it's not that easy to make. And I would like to grab some examples from jazz. I love jazz, and I think that jazz music is one of the most difficult music genres to master. And how they do it? Well, they rehearse for thousands of hours over each music piece until they play it perfectly, precisely. So what do they do when they go on stage? They play it completely different. Each time they go on stage, they play the same song in a different way. They improvise, but the song is still there. You can still tell what song they are playing, and that's because they respect the underlying structure. Something similar to the example that Brian gave us yesterday about Burning Man, structure plus chaos. So disaster responders do the very same thing. While they are not responding to a real disaster, they are simulating one. They gather at some place and they exercise their protocols. That way they are ready to respond effectively once the real situation happens. But they also have to improvise because each disaster is unique and brings its unique challenges. So if both jazz musicians and disaster responders, who are the people we are trying to help, practice a lot, why wouldn't we do the same thing? And how can we exercise this? How can we simulate the situation in our teams? A good way of doing so is just agree on an everyday problem with the whole team and start working at 9 a.m. and do not stop working until 22, until 10 p.m. So the only condition is that you have to get something working by the end of that time, and something that helps makes the situation better from when you started compared to when you finished, and that has to be usable and has to be public. Anyone has to be able to use it. So in doing these exercises, that code is quite little, but it says, catastrophic or otherwise extreme events often bear the fruit of new ideas, which is something that Anders Ramsay said. So when we started doing these exercises, these simulations, we began to notice that there were some values that we wanted to apply in the non-so urgent projects, in our everyday design, not this special kind of design. And so we started trying to make a workshop of this one extreme day to get a very first version of a new project. And we noticed that, well, these extreme constraints, we are really good ideas. It seems that when we are under a lot of pressure, a lot of awesome things happens. I don't know if it's something that our brains are prepared for. We should ask neurologists or psychologists, but that's what we get. We also found out that the experience is very exciting for the whole team. So I think that you know that two fundamental components of entering flow state are having clear goals and being focused. And the fact that you have 20 hours to get something working, that's very simple. That's something very well bounded. I think it helps to arrive to those two conditions. And Another interesting effect we notice is that there's a kind of feature Darwinism in the fact that you have a really constrained deadline, and you have to get something working by that deadline. So each feature has to fight really hard against the other ones to get to the implementation and to its design phases. So I think all this together can be a fruitful exercise to get the fundamental product essence by the end of one day. So it's a very fast way, a very easy way of getting to understand what defines the product we are trying to do in a very short amount of time. And it's a kind of, you guard the whole team, and they are really immersed in the project in just a few hours. And then you continue normally. Okay, to sum up a bit, we think that designers and design thinking are really needed in these emergency situations. But we also recognize that designers have to adapt to these particular situations. The process, the usual processes change a lot. So there's a need for adaptation. And Brian, yesterday, sorry, I'm making so many references to you, but yeah, he's over here. He talked about impact by the end of his talk. He said that there were some people that were really interested in the impact of what they were doing. So I would like to end with a question regarding impact. What do you think is the impact of doing something that in any way can help to save just one life? Thank you.